Right, so I think pretty much everybody that's coming back is back. So we'll start the next little bit about set electrics, and then a little project which will take us up to lunchtime. And this project is going to run through with little bits being added to it throughout the week, and I'll sort of recap all of them on Saturday. But we are going to, you'll see in the Dropbox on Wednesday, there's a thing called Delorian project. So we were involved with I spoke about my company briefly the other day, and so we were involved with Back to the Future. That's just happened in Manchester in February. So we were brought on board. There was an associate on the project as well, and an assistant who I think might even be here. But we were brought on board to look after just the set electrics and the integration of the effects within the scenery. So we were sort of taking that role that usually as an associate or an assistant you might be doing, and we've made that an entire own role just because the project was so big. So we're going to give you the chance to see the original in the Delorian project. There's no need to watch them now. You can watch them over lunch or whenever you like. But there is some briefing videos. They are 3 videos of 3 of the different elements this is from the actual Zoom call that happened between me and the lighting designer, one of the lighting designers, Tim Lutkin, and the set designer, Tim Hatley, and the production manager, Simon Marlowe, and Tom, who works for me. And all of us are in the Zoom call, and you can hear what we were talking about 3 different elements of the car. And the project is going to be to create a bid package for those 3 elements, to create a drawing for those 3 elements, and then later in the week you'll learn about. I think this afternoon you're doing a bit about Lightright, and I think tomorrow a bit about magic sheets, and then so to add to that you can make a little magic sheet for these 3 elements of the car, and also a Lightright file. So it's a sort of one project with lots of strands to it, and you'll learn more about each of the different strands as the different lessons carry on. But before we get into it, I thought it might be useful to have a look at some other drawings and packages after Robin talked this morning about the sort of information they get. So if you look in the Wednesday Dropbox under set electric drawings, there's 6 files in there. We very, very briefly looked at the 2 Bat Out of Hell ones this morning. That's an example of a US bid package for a scenic electrics item, and also a drawing. And then the other 4 there, let's look at the document that says Doc's Future Chair. That's the best one to look at now, which is going to be, this was a prop or small scenic item from Back to the Future, which was a chair that the design remit from the set designer and from the lighting designer was they wanted some tape around the edge of some steps going up to the chair, and on the back of the chair they wanted a flux capacitor that lit up. So the sort of drawing that we would then, as the associates looking after the set electrics on the show, might send to the suppliers is something like this, because as Robin said, there's a variety of things they get. They might get an incredibly detailed drawing about exactly what chips they want in exactly what spacing, and that's fine. But there might also be an occasion where you know that all you need to do is formalize a set designer or a lighting designer's idea into some sort of drawing to get it to the supplier so they can put a price on it. Robin will give you a way more accurate price with something like this, so he knows the tape around the steps has got to be those particular lengths, rather than just someone saying, okay, we'd like some tape around the steps and we'd like a flux capacitor on the back of the chair, because that means he's got to open the drawing, measure it, and as he said, those costs get added onto the project. So the more information you can give him to quote, the better your quote will be. And you don't need to be as detailed as saying exactly where everything goes, because I've done quite a few projects with working with Robin or with Howard or with Junction or with Electric Foundry, and if you send them a very detailed drawing, ultimately that is their job. They do this day in, day out. They they know more than we do as associates what the best product for a particular effect is going to be. So you could spend hours and hours and hours drawing something, and then they could turn around and say, you know, this thing's just come out last week and it's going to be perform the task that you needed to do way better. And then you just wasted hours drawing something that it doesn't exist. And on the other end of the spectrum, if you send them a back of a fag packet sketch with very little information on no dimensions, you're likely to get a fairly high quote because they've got no idea what it is that they're, how long it is, if it's a battery, how long it's going to be on stage for, that sort of thing. So there's a sort of happy medium that I find that they like the most, because they get to delve one step further and explore the various things that they know and they can look at and come back to us with exactly what product it is, but they've got sufficient information to provide a good quote. So that's an example of a drawing that we sent to get bids on for this chair. And so you can see we've just dimensioned around the steps, and we've put a little text box in the corner which says the edge of each step to be lined with bright RGB cold white LED tape in extrusion into the step, and each step to be controlled as a single channel. So that they know from that we're not telling them how many drivers that they need to use, because that's as I say, it's their job. They do it day to day. So they don't need to be told that sort of thing, but they can be told that that's the amount of tape and that we need to be able to control each one in each individual control channel. And then they will go back and work out exactly what tape is and how many drivers it's going to be and how much that will cost. And then for the flux capacitor, which isn't an off-the-shelf item, we've just said 21 RGB white, super bright, individually controllable LED sources built into the set piece. So this was a very early designer's sketch. So it's not a construction drawing, which I think Robin did touch on this morning, but it's worth noting that those two things are, those two types of drawings are very different. You will get a designer's drawing, and most designers aren't qualified engineers or indeed set builders. So their drawings will show you something like this, which is what they want the scenic item to look like. And they'll give you dimensions because they've worked out how it's going to get in and out of the wing, or how it's going to fly and where it's going to fly. But they're not going to say exactly where all the nuts and bolts are to put it together. And you're going to send the design drawing out to bid, and then probably concurrently, the scenic piece is also being sent out to bid. And that might go through another draftsperson that converts it into a construction drawing. Some shows have a draftsperson dedicated to doing just that. Some shows take the designer's drawings and then the set builders create the construction drawings. It depends on the show, it depends on the set builder, it depends on the production manager, it depends on the budget. But this drawing is just a design drawing. You might see drawings that are way more complicated. They are construction drawings, and they will have come, as I say, either from a draftsperson dedicated to doing that or from the scenic contractor. That drawing is still necessary to get to Lamp and Pencil or whoever it is that is building the set electrics, because they will then be able to see exactly where all the joins are in the piece, and therefore where they might have to cut the tape if it's going to come in. If it's a piece that's I don't know, 4 meters wide, so it can't fit in the back of a trailer in one piece, it has to travel in two, then that might not be clear on a designer's drawing because they haven't worked that out. But it might be on a construction drawing, and so then they'll know that they need to cut the tape here, and then you need to put a connector in, so when it comes back on site, they can pop it back together again. So it's important to note that just because you've sent them this at the beginning of the process doesn't mean that they don't need any more drawings. As soon as you get a construction drawing, it should be shared with them so they can see exactly what they need. So that's an example of what you might send as an associate or an assistant, where you might send out to be bid just as a drawing. You'll also send with it a Set Electric's bid document, or a package. People call it all different things. So there's an example of one in the Dropbox, Wednesday Set Electric drawing. It's called Environment Breakdown Master. So this is the reason that there is only a couple of shows in there for you to look at is exactly the same as Robin said. Lots of shows are under heavy NDA. So we're showing you the shows that we can share with you, I'm afraid. So sorry if it's a bit boring if we're just talking about 6, Bat-Atapel and Back to the Future. But this is the breakdown that I sent out when we sent a particular another particular item scenery from Back to the Future out, which listed, I think it's not a dissimilar document to some of the things that Robin showed, which is it lists the item, it lists the equipment that it needs to be, and then the desired design effect. As Robin said, sometimes it's better to tell them exactly what you're looking for in terms of an effect, because they might come back with a better product. So it's all very well just saying, for example, the top of that on page 1, it says PROS environment right, RGB white pixel tape, 260 meters. So you could have said that, and he will quote then for 260 meters of RGB white pixel tape. But we've said it needs to be a smooth linear pixel tape in 17 and 30mm channel, design specified by Scenic. That means design specified by the Scenic designer. Because we've put the effects in it, he knows exactly what we're trying to achieve, rather than just quoting for 260 meters of tape. So he knows it needs to be a smooth line of light, which means it must need some capping on it. That we'll come to that later in the document, but it's always best to put exactly what you're trying to, you or the lighting designer or the set designer or the director wants to achieve from that particular piece. I like to write whether it's cabled or wireless, because that has a big cost implication, and half the things on half shows are wireless and half of them are cabled, and often things are wireless that you didn't think needed to be, but they are, just because it's easier in the wings. And I've written a little column that said mock-up, because as he said, a prototype is always going to get you a better product at the end of the day, because there'll ultimately be things that you'll say, actually, that blue's not quite right. Can it be a deeper blue? It's a bit late if they've already made it. If they've done you a little prototype or a mock-up, then you can sort of feed that back early on. It's not going to affect the cost as much as if you're in the theatre and suddenly say, can you take this 1 kilometre of pixel tape out and replace it with one that's got a deeper blue in it? So, and then I do that's the breakdown table at the beginning, and then I go into a wordy sort of document about exactly what each thing needs to be. So this was, some people might have seen the show, or you might have seen pictures. In the environment, which is what we would refer to as anything audience side of the proscenium, there was a huge circuit board design that came out into the house, stage left and stage right and overhead, and each of the circuit board elements had a pixel tape in it, and so we ran video content through it and chased it with effects from the desk. But there was about 1 kilometre of pixel tape over the whole thing, and this is the bid document for that. So I've written that it needs to create an even line of light, that it's pixel controlled. I've written no less than grouping of 3 pixels, which is the thing that you might refer to. Some people say, do you want to group in 1s, 3s, 6, or 9s? That's just about how many control channels you turn. When you turn on channel 1562 on the desk, how many pixels physically turn on? If you do it so it only physically turns on 1 pixel, that's an awful lot of universes you've got just for one scenic piece. And in reality, if you're just sending a chase effect down it, you could just put 1 channel and turn 3 pixels on. It would do the same thing. Suddenly you've made it a third less data. And that appears to be bright enough when it's on and shining through secret screen or black gauze. So that is because the set designer was very adamant early on that they wanted that when the tape was not on, that you didn't know that it was going to light up. Which often with a light box you do. You can see, I'm sure you've all walked into a theatre and seen something, and you've gone, that at some point that's going to light up because it's blatantly obvious. Whereas this needed to be almost invisible as a circuit board, and when it lit up, you suddenly noticed it was there. So we use a product. In the end, we use a product called Secret Screen, which is made by Perspex, and it's the product you see in airports where they have the black signs that with white text behind them, but the white text is off. So if they're trying to filter you through a different exit and they turn the text off, it just looks like a black box. You turn the light on and it appears through it. Then I've written the construction detail about who's making the set piece, so who the scenic electrics contractor will have to work with. Some people like working with others more than other set builders more than others, so they might like to know that information. We'll give them the set design drawing of this, and we've also given them the construction drawing, and we've detailed what that is in this document. I've written things to note, just because it's sort of a gentle reminder that you can bid on it, but just keep remembering that you need to take into account, you need to pick up the phone and ring the set contractor to talk about this particular item. And then exactly what I want them to provide. So I've said 825 meters of RGB cold white pixel tape, and the pixel tape must be RGB cold white. It must have 60 LEDs per meter. The cold white must be between 6 and 7.2 in terms of color temperature. Some people are really specific and say it needs to be 7.1, 7.150, but if you know that the designer just wants it to be ice cold white, I'd say something like that, 6 to 7.2. And then I've written sufficient PSUs for installation and sufficient DMX pixel drivers for installation, because if you go and say it needs to have 18 PSUs and 42 NTEC P-links to work, if it actually takes 44, then that's your fault, and it's not up to the contractor to provide the other two. If you've written sufficient, it's their responsibility then to work out how much it is, how many things they need to make it work. And ultimately, they're going to do that anyway, because they're not going to provide you something that doesn't work when it gets there. But they could come back and say, this is going to cost more money now, and the show needs to pay more because it's going to using 14 more PSUs than you asked for. So I write sufficient, and then that leaves it sort of less chance of them coming back and asking you for more money. But I have written exactly what the DMX drivers need to have, which is gamma correction, overload protection, and 12-bit PWM dimming, just so that you don't get some crap Amazon driver that makes it all flicker. And this document then goes on to the various different elements that we want for that particular scenic piece. And I do a different document for each scenic piece and send it out. Sometimes you might send, if the show's got only 4 or 5 pieces, you might send it out as one document to 3 different contractors or 4 different contractors to get a quote for. This had, Back to the Future had, I think, something like 21 or 22 bid documents that went out for it for Set Electrics. We split them up deliberately because we knew, as Robin said, some people are better than others at certain things. We knew that some contractors wouldn't want to do some elements. Some contractors were better at some elements. Some scenic contractors prefer working with some Set Electrics contractors. So it was a sort of Venn diagram of which documents went to which people to make sure that we split the load as well, because it's all very well. You'll often hear people say, oh, this was late. Oh, so-and-so delivered this late. Oh, the show we started previewing without X, or we didn't get Y until press night. Now, that's often not the Set Electrics contractor's fault. If you've asked them to do the entire show's worth of Set Electrics and you've given them some of the information at the beginning, but the set builder's a bit late and they deliver something to the scenic electric contractor a bit late, it's therefore going to arrive late in the theatre. But it all has to go through them before it gets to stage. So they're the last people to see it, usually, and then deliver it to the theatre, and they usually get the blame then for it being late. So I made a conscious effort, and it's now become quite popular to do to split a show out so that you can ensure that everything's going to arrive on time, because everyone's only doing a small portion of it rather than doing the entire show. We would never have got Back to the Future on stage if one contractor did the entire show. All 4 did a relative equal share of the amount of work that needed to be done. And we split it out that one contractor did all the trucks, one contractor did all the flown pieces, one did the environment, and one did the deck, the stage deck, and all the smoke. And it worked really well. They integrated with each other when they needed to, and everything arrived on time. So that's an example of a bid pack. If anyone's got any questions, just jump in on the camera or just write them in the chat if you've got any questions about the bid packages or the drawings. There's a couple of other examples in there, which are, there's another one, which is the clock tower. That was a flown piece that Robin ended up doing, in fact. And there's also, so let's go on to the next thing. If no one's got any questions about the bid package or the drawing, I'll go on to as-built drawing. Oh, here we go. In splitting out the elements of different builders, would you be concerned that different drivers have different curves? Yes, that's true. Yes. We were quite, hi Nina, I'm just going to answer Adam's question with you, which is we made sure when it went to different people that we were keen that everybody used the same drivers, and we worked that out after we sent the bid documents out, really, because we suddenly realized that you might notice in some occasions that it was a different color temperature of blue. We did know when we sent them out that there would be times when that wouldn't matter. If the blue on a truck is different to the blue in the environment, nobody is going to know, and it doesn't really matter. But dimming, certainly. If there's two elements that are sitting next to each other on stage, one built by one person, one built by another, you need to make sure the tape and the drivers are the same. So I hope that answers your question. Nina, hi.
Hi. So I had a quick question about when you sent out for different bids and for different quotes. Did you send out all of the element pieces to all of the shops to quote all of them and then have it split up among the different shops, or did you send out certain pieces to the different shops and have those quoted individually?
Yeah, the latter. I sent out certain pieces to certain people, which is, and I think they all knew that was happening, but I don't know. I decided early on with the production manager, we sat down, we worked out there was a little bit of politics regarding one of the set builders didn't want to work with one of the contractors, so we knew we couldn't match those lines up. We also knew that one of the set electrics contractors was way better at doing smoke and is a proven entity at doing smoke and floor work than any others, so I knew that I ideally would go to him, but everyone went to at least two people to ensure there was fair quoting. But ideally, I knew that needed to go to him. Some people just really don't want to do another lantern and another window. Like they're too busy, which is fine. But we did send out the things like that float. There's a document in there called Clock Tower, which is the flown clock tower piece. That went to Lamp and Pencil. It went to Junction. And it went to Electric Foundry, and they all quoted for it. And it didn't necessarily go to the cheapest person. It went to the person who came back with. Once everyone came back, we then split it out into logical things, so that everybody all the things built by one set builder was being looked after by one set electric contractor. So it wasn't three people talking to one person. So we didn't send them all out at the beginning because I just knew that some people would just be bored of quoting with 23 items and they wouldn't do it properly. So if they've only got 3 to do, they might do it more accurately.
Okay, great. Thank you.
No worries. Paige, did you learn about this by taking more experience as an associate, or did you work? I've never worked for a set electrics company. I just have done. When I first started as an associate, my drawing and I probably didn't send out a bid pack. It was probably just like an email that just said, could you provide some light bulbs to go around this proscenium? And it was a drawing that looked like a really basic Vectorworks drawing that just said light bulb. That's fine. I just learned by doing it. I learned by talking to the contractors, hearing what they want. And also I think it's maybe slightly unfair to show you all the Back to the Future documentation because, as I said, we split an entire role, one specific job of the associate became an entire role on the production. So we could afford to spend more time on the drawings and on the packs, and because that's all we were doing. We weren't looking after the rig or anything like that. So, but there are some associates who produce even way better documentation than I do now, and it's mostly by learning. There's very few people that have gone to work for a set electrics company and then come back again to be an associate. But working with them a lot, they're all very open to what they like and what they don't like. I've got quite a good relationship with most of them now. So they're quite open to talking back what they need. And is this just from your experience knowing which contractor is best person? Yes, it's just from doing shows where things that you see things turn up and you think, well, we're never going to let them do that again because that was a disaster. And they're also open to it. There's lots of things, for example, that I sent out to Lamp and Pencil to be loads of costumes for Back to the Future that needed to light up. And Robin came back and said, do you know what? You've given us 4 or 5 items now, and we're now at workshop capacity. We can't do anymore. So thanks, but we're going to not bid on this, which takes a lot for a company to not bid on it because, like you said, they need to be running shows concurrently to keep the business going. So it's quite hard for them to say thanks, but no thanks. But then you respect them more because they've said that they can't do it, so they're not going to deliver it late. So feel free to ask more questions about that, and I'll just talk about one last bit of drawing before we hit the project. Which is, you'll see the last drawing that's in that Dropbox is drawn by, actually drawn by someone in this course. I'm not going to embarrass her and say who it is, but it's an excellent, excellent drawing. So I thought it would be a good example, which is, as Robin showed in an example of one of the 6 documents, it was way more detailed than the one I just showed you of the chair, for example. And this is way more detailed than it would have been when the show first started. This is for the Lehman trilogy, which is a show that started at the National Theatre, then it went to the Armory in New York, then it came back into the West End, and then it went back to New York. We were brought on board as a company to come and create the as-built drawings, which is what you do when the show exists, but maybe has slightly mutated from what it was meant to be when it started. So actually there's no drawing of what all the set electrics looks like now, because you might send that show back out again to bid. And if you send it out to bid based on the initial drawings from when the show first happened, it doesn't take into account all the things that changed when you were at the theatre. And all that's going to happen is you're going to have to do all those things all over again. So we came in and did an as-built set of drawings, which is what these are. So that is exactly what the show was when it finished in the West End. Exactly where the tape is, what channel it is, what circuit it is, where is it plugged into, what driver it's plugged into, where the driver is, what multi-core feeds the driver, which means that then served as a manual to go to Broadway when it went back to Broadway, for the electricians to use so they could work out exactly what cable goes where. But it also serves as a tool for future bid packages of the show. The show will have other iterations in the future. And at the moment, what everyone's doing is quoting on the version when it happened at the National, which is 3 versions ago. And it's changed since then. For starters, it's got 10% bigger in size. So yes, Paige, there you go. So it was, it's now gone back to being big again, but it didn't quite get sawn in half, but it was made smaller because it needed to fit in a theatre in the West End. So they took out 10% of everything, of the size of the cube, and crushed it back together again, which is fine. And of course they can do that, and it worked mechanically and engineering wise, but it wasn't designed to do that when it was first spec'd. So as a result, there's some slightly quirky wiring in there now, but again, it's fine. But that, if you didn't know that and you came to look at it and bid on it, you'd be sort of questioning where the logic comes from. So this as-built set of drawings is then something that can be used to bid on a show in the future. It's not something that's done very often, and that's a shame, because too many shows go through an enormous amount of work at the beginning to get them drawn, get them bid, very fine detailed design drawings about exactly what's going to go in the theatre. You arrive in the theatre, something doesn't fit, the designer changes their mind. The lighting designer wants to add an extra bit of tape here. The production electrician goes and fits it, and it's done. And by the next tea break, you've suddenly got the thing that the designer wants. Isn't that great? Everyone thinks it's amazing. The show has a press night. You all drink champagne. You all go home, and then that's the end of your role. And then someone rings you 6 months later and says the show's been a success. We're going to move it to another country, but we're going to keep this one running. We're just going to build a new one in Germany. And you go, okay, fine. And then you dig up all your old paperwork, and then you send it out, and then you forget that you've added a bit of tape, and the show goes to Germany, and the designer arrives and they say, "Where's that bit of blue tape?" And you think, yeah, well, what we didn't do is document it. So as an associate, your role in the theatre isn't just to keep on top of the work notes and do the spots, and there's also keeping on top of the documentation about what is being added from a set electrics point of view or taken away whilst you're in the theatre, because it will always change. And if you don't keep on top of it, it will come back to haunt you later when you're asked to do the show again, which you probably will, unless you were terrible at your job. There's a good chance you'll get asked to do it again. And then you dig up your old paperwork that you're really proud of, but you didn't note down all the changes that happened in the theatre, which means that someone's bidding on a show that's inaccurate. So keeping on top of the paperwork is a huge, huge thing. And often it's a Chinese whispers in the theatre about people. A lighting designer might simply go over to the electrician and say, do you think it'd be possible just if we could just add another footlight here? And it just happens. And if no one has written that down, no one will know. I'm trying to think of an example, because I think it's always better. When I did Angels in America, I didn't do the version originally in the National, but I did do it when it went to Broadway for Paulie. She wasn't available, so I went over as the associate. We got to, I think maybe day 3 of tech, and it had Nathan Lane in it, who was a relatively demanding actor. And it got to a point when he was in the bed, and Marianne, who directed Warhorse and Curious Incident, she's a fabulous director, turned around and said, "Rob, is Nathan's bed about to smoke?" And I thought, nope. No, it's not, because I have absolutely no idea what you're talking about. And I turned to Gina, who is my US associate, and I said, did we put a smoke machine on the bid list? She said, no, there's no record of a smoke machine. We looked at it frantically, going through all the paperwork, going, no, there's no record of a smoke machine anywhere on this show. And then it came to materialize that what happened is that during the tech at the National, Marianne had said, wouldn't it be great if Nathan's bed started smoking? And an electrician went, yeah, of course, and then just put a smoke machine in it. And then it happened to keep being there for the next 16 weeks while the show was on. And then they moved it to Broadway, and nobody wrote it down, so nobody told us. And we were 2 new associates on the show. And then we've got a director and an actor screaming, "Where's my smoking bed?" And it's not like we can suddenly do it, because you're now in a commercial theatre world where you don't just have a smoke machine lying around with nothing to do. So you have to say, "Oh, really sorry, it's tomorrow. This isn't going to smoke until tomorrow." So that's like a really important thing. You need to just keep writing everything down, because I think Tim probably said that your notepad and your pen is your best friends, because you just need to keep on top of everything that's changing, so that if it's done again, you don't look like a fool, or even worse, one of your colleagues doesn't look like a fool, like I did. Jason, how much pre-production time would you have for this? So I guess you mean for like the documentation for Back to the Future. We were brought on board in the relatively late. It's not going to sound late, but it was relatively late in the process, because they realized that there was quite a lot for the associates and the assistants to deal with. We were brought on board in August or the September and the show of last year, and the show fitted up in January. So we were working on other shows between September and January, but we probably did around 15 to 20 hours a week between September and January on the show, doing just the set electrics, which gives you a good indication of how much time and effort it could take to do a large scale musical. It's time consuming. So we've got 20 minutes left, so I'll start talking about the project. So over lunch or after the day-to-day, whenever you want to, take a little look at the 3 videos that are in the Delorian project folder. They're called, it's in Wednesday, Delorian project briefing videos. It's called Headlight Indicators, Interior Face Light, and Rear Lights. So these are just, the car ended up having an enormous amount of stuff in it. For those who don't know, the film Back to the Future has a car in it called the Delorian. You probably all do know, but and the Delorian was in the show, and it had an enormous amount of scenic effects in it and electrics, and we looked after all of them, the effects and the electrics and the video elements in it. And I've just pulled out 3 different things from it, and you can hear the conversations that happened between me and the lighting designer and the set designer about those 3 different things, or 4, I suppose: headlights and indicators, and then the rear lights, and then some interior face light for the actors in the car. And the project is going to be, and you can take as long as you need to do this, there's no time pressure to do it, but we would like you to produce a drawing using the knowledge you learned yesterday from Tim about Vectorworks, to produce a drawing of like the one I showed you of a Doc's chair. So a sort of design interpretation drawing. It doesn't have to be detailed exactly where the tape is and how many millimeters it is and the type of extrusion, just a sort of design interpretation drawing that you would send to a scenic electrics contractor for bid. And then with that, a little bid pack like the ones I've shown you. There are many different types, and I'm sure in the additional learning, I think it's an additional learning section, of the Dropbox, with all the different shows, there's some of those that are mine as well in there. You'll see the different types of scenic bid packs that are there. Everyone has their own style, so don't be swayed by mine. It's certainly not the be all and end all of styles of documents. You can do whichever you like, but it'd be great for you guys to do a drawing of those items and create a bid pack to go with it. And then as you learn about magic sheets, we'll do a designer's magic sheet to go with it, so you can do a little cheat sheet version of the car that the designer would have on their desk that told them exactly what channel the headlight was and exactly what channel the rear lights were. And also a light file for those items, which Tim's going to do more teaching on this afternoon about light, and then you can do a light file that's attached to that. That details exactly all the tape that's in it and what channel it is and what address it is. So in the briefing videos, that will give you the sort of design chats that we had that I then used. These are the actual ones the actual call I'd made, the ones that we used to then work out exactly what product to put in it. And then if you look in the assets folder, there is a PDF called Delorian shopping list, which is all the things that the lighting designers wanted to put in the car when, I think I got sent this maybe 3 or 4 days after I started on the project. They wanted it to do this. So this is just to ignore the list on the first page because there's lots of things in there that we aren't asking you to do. But it gives you some good picture references of exactly what they wanted it to look like. Some of them are car film references and some of them are other mock-ups of the DeLorean. And then I've put a folder called reference pictures. The reference pictures folder shows the film had 3 different cars in it. This was one of them. And we got to scan it, 3D scan it, so we could use the dimensions to make the real one, to make the shows one. So these are all the reference pictures that I took when I was in the workshop when we were scanning that car. So you can use that to help you with the drawing about exactly where the headlights might want to be. And then I've put in the design drawings folder 3D WGs, which are, you don't have to use all 3. You could just use the first one that's called car drawings. The second 2, front bodywork and rear bodywork, are a 3D DWG. So it's absolutely up to you and how skilled you want to push yourself to in terms of whether you want to draw it in 3D or not. You don't have to. The car drawings, the first one is just a flattened 2D drawing with some isometric views in it. And you're more than welcome to just use that. But I've given you all 3 so you can see which ones you want to use. And you might want to use viewports, or you might want to do different drawings for the different elements of the car, or one big drawing and put all the elements in one big drawing. There's no rules. So you should just do whatever you want to do for it. So I'll answer the questions from the top. Just want to check, is it the associate that keeps on top of the set electric changes, or the assistant, or both? Good question. Well, so in the UK, there is very few shows that have the luxury of having an assistant and an associate, but just for budget reasons. I could probably count on one hand how many in the last 12 months had a show paid for an associate and a show paid for assistant. So ultimately, it would probably end up being the assistant's role in that case, if there were 2. But in the UK, it's probably going to be the associate, because you're probably the only. It's you. So, but yeah, I suppose it probably would be the assistant, but it might be both if it's something that's quite heavily design based. If you are in a show and the designer has said that they want it to look a bit more, they want the red to be a bit redder in that tape, it might be the associate that makes the call on what tape it is that then they choose, and that's the assistant that keeps that documentation up to date. But certainly in this country, there's probably only going to be one of you. Page, yes. So a design sketch, we'll put this in the Delorian project Slack channel, so you can all go back and remind yourselves on it. But a design sketch, so a drawing that would get sent to a contractor for bid, the bid pack. It will be the Lightright file when you learn more about Lightright, and a cheat sheet or a magic sheet, whatever you want to call it, for the designer. That is, I think that is it. Bridget, how can we help?
So just to be clear, this is the Back to the Future at the Manchester Opera House, right?
Yes, it is. That's correct.
Okay. Good so question. You were talking about many companies in the UK don't have the funding to support staff, as you will. So for that particular production, it was a co-lighting design, right?
Correct. Yeah.
So did they have an associate, and why did the company / the designers choose to outsource or subcontract a company, meaning your company, to then subcontract several other companies? It seems like that direct line would have been a cost saving sort of feature rather than so like stacking many things.
So the show was relatively complicated in the setup of the fact that it was a co-lighting designer, and there's some personal and private reasons why that existed, but let's carry on for all intents and purposes and just say it was a co-lighting design. It had a programmer associate, which it was Chris Hurst, who is I mentioned the other day, who he's a brilliant programmer, but also an associate. He was the programmer associate, and then Sam was the assistant. And we were brought on board by the production manager on the show because he said that whenever he's on a show of that scale before, and it's been up to the associates to do all the documentation, that which feeds back into the fact that in the UK we don't have the funds to support an associate in the way that you do in the US. In terms of the way it's been paid for in the US is you often get paid a weekly fee as an associate, and you get paid the same weekly fee to prep a show than you do to be sitting in the theatre. In the UK, we
on Broadway.
Yeah, on Broadway. Yes, correct. Yeah. In the UK, we don't have that. You just get paid a fee to do the whole show. So, and the production manager has said that he thought that the money that they would be paying us to look after just that element would ultimately be saved in what they would not be changing in the theatre if someone was looking after it so much at the beginning. Because you realise the show, a big musical like that, it's probably got a theatre set electric contingency somewhere between 15 and 40,000, because you're going to be arriving in a theatre and suddenly the designer can say, can we add this? Oh, I didn't really mean that, but can we have that? And he said, I think if we spend the money now on you guys doing it, then we probably won't be spending the money on mistakes in the theatre. So quite a lot of responsibility. Also, a job that didn't exist. Like, it's not. I'm not pretending that that role exists. It doesn't. We just got asked to do it for that show because it was a scale that needed someone, but it doesn't really exist. So it's only because of the cost. He thought the cost saving outweighed the cost that it would cost for us to do it. But yes, you could arguably say if you had a dedicated associate, maybe you need to have us. But I think that the designer has a really good working relationship with Chris. Both line designers have a really, really good working relationship with Chris and like that role, programmer associate as a role, which again is a slightly uncommon role I know in the US. But they really like that relationship, and so it was important that was kept. And so we sort of filled the gap in between Sam and Chris as the sort of assistant associate. Just doing one specific task, which I think helped alleviate everyone's workload.
But with electric pieces on this particular production and the longevity, did that fall on Chris's shoulders to maintain or communicate with the staff electrician and I don't know how good that staff electrician is, and I assume it's a house electrician, not the company or the producer, like the producer production company's electrician. So, was that Chris's?
It was. Yeah, and Sam kept the paperwork up to date for us when we sort of left. We put it all in. We were in the theatre for a while because we were sort of reacting to things that needed to be done, changes that needed to happen. But then ultimately it was Sam that looked after the paperwork in terms of adding channels when people wanted to split things out into a bit more channeling. And the handover with the electricians happened during our time at the theatre. We brought the electricians on board earlier than they necessarily would be to sort of feed that in, their knowledge into the electrics before it arrived in the theatre. So all the electricians on the show knew what was about to arrive. And I suppose because we were there, we could do that. Whereas as an associate, you might not be in the position to bring all the electricians to the workshop and get to look at all the things that are about to arrive. So, I hope that answers that.
Yeah, it helps. I was a little confused. It is a fuzzy sort of situation.
It is a fuzzy situation, not one that we didn't need to really dwell on, because it's not one that exists in any other show. But
yeah, and I saw a bunch of comments on the side of people that seemed to also think it was confusing, but didn't understand that it wasn't a job. So I was like, it isn't a job, but also what is the situation?
But it's also, shows are getting much more complicated that it may become a job, it may become a role, because and when if you're doing a theme park, for example, that job does exist because it's so specific and so big as a role. So yeah, it might become more prevalent in theatre. It might do.
Yeah. Thanks.
No worries. In other questions, the way we work in the UK needs to change because at most levels there is no assistant or associate, and the LD or products do everything in my experience. Yeah, you're right, Jason. You're absolutely right. Yeah, it does really need to change actually, because we often get the associate line, budget line, or the assistant budget line often gets a sort of very round figure that bears no relation on days or hours or time in the theatre, but it's just sort of a sometimes it's like a token gesture lump sum of money. But then because you want to perform your task as best you can, you dedicate an enormous amount of time to the show, way more than you are financially recompensed for, because you want to do a good job. So you'll often find that associates do take on so many shows that they're sort of, and I did it for about 3 years, and it's sort of exhausting, where you do back-to-back techs, where you sit in a tech and you will then hit previews, and then the previews, whether it's 1, 2, or 3 weeks, you prep the next show, all the paperwork you need to do, or 2 shows time or 3 shows time, and then you get straight on a train, you go to another theatre and you start another tech and you do the whole process again. And I did that for a long time, and it's very unhealthy for loads of reasons. But yes, you're right. It's not just in the UK, Bridget. And I apologise that I sort of just tarred the whole of the country with Broadway's brush there. But yeah, even off Broadway and regional theatres, it's the same thing in the US. You do have you do have a slightly better union situation than we do in terms of keeping your workers safe, but I know that's still not the case in small theatres. It's not going to be. It's much like we have here. Unfortunately, we just have here at all scales. So even the biggest musical in the West End is not dealt with as fairly as maybe as it should do, because the role, it's not even the role is that new. It's just that people haven't yet realised the value of it, and it's hard to attach a value to it, I suppose, unless you start charging by the hour, and then you realise that it's really the producers realise it's really expensive because you're working for a long time on a show. We could talk about the financial disaster situation of an associate assistant in the industry for a long time, but you're right. One of the things coming out of the shutdown is the growing movement to make changes the way we work, especially in regards to interns. Yes, I'm a big believer that an intern should always be paid, even if it's not the same rate. It's not going to be the same rate as an assistant, but it needs to be enough to cover the various things it needs to cover. As soon as your show is not of a certain scale, one has to fight for archiving and documented time. Oh my God, yeah. Archiving and documented time is something you never get given money for. They don't understand what it takes and how beneficial it is. You're right. It actually, you need a production manager that understands how beneficial archiving and documenting takes in order to facilitate getting the money for it, because a producer often doesn't realize it. But we have I've noticed in the last 2 years maybe, that we've been brought on board just to do that, just to archive a show, because the producer has realized that they now need to do it because they've just got the contract to send it to Broadway, or they've just got the contract to send it to Australia, and they need it archived, and we'll come and do it. But it would have been better if it was the original associate on the show and they did it 4 days after press night. But they just don't want to pay the day rate to do it. So yeah, we could talk about it for ages, and maybe I'll stay here over lunch for 15-20 minutes. Anyone that wants to pick my brains about I'm a signed up union member in the US as well as working as an associate in the UK, so I can give a relatively balanced opinion about the difference between working in both. Tim was way more experienced, and lots of others that are talking this week are obviously way more experienced. I'm USA. About working in America, but I can give you a Brits version of working in America if you want to, or the differences, and then they do pay better. So one of the good things that's coming out of the show. Yes, for my theatre, a smaller show would have me working with the LD, but on a bigger show, we get to have a body election. I work with both. Yeah, and actually, it's a shame to say, but it's obviously the scale of show that's going to influence whether an associate or an assistant on a show, on the role, or whether the role exists. But it's also down to the designer. If the designer pushes heavily for it, then money is always found. And it might be because the designer isn't free to do all of the previews and needs an associate there, or it might just be that the designer says, I need an associate. And more designers do need to say that, because that's the only way it's going to be. As soon as it's normal, it will be normal. But whilst it's still considered a luxury, it's therefore considered a luxurious line item. So it's until all the designers have one, or more people have one, it will still always be considered a line item in the budget that it could just be, or maybe we could squeeze a bit of money out there so they can have some more for costume, which is the sort of harsh reality of a tangible versus an intangible item. A tangible item that has a figure attached to it by a producer can always be quantified, because you say, okay, well, that projector is going to cost $4,000 a week, but that's okay because I'm getting a physical projector for that. So I understand that. Whereas just to say that they're going to pay you $1,900 a week as an associate, but they don't understand what they're getting for that because they can't see anything for it. It's a hard battle to fight, but we're getting there. So I say I'm not doing anything major in trying to turn the industry around, but we have been quite upfront with producers when we come on board on a project and say it is going to take this much time to do the show, and we do now charge by the hour, and we say we're going to work on it for this many hours, and we're going to work on it for this many hours a week and for this many weeks, and let's keep talking about it. If someone's going to give you a fee as an associate of £3,000 to do a musical, and then halfway through the set designer changes the set, and so the lighting designer changes it, and you have to redraw a plan. You've sort of doubled your workload, but no one's given you any more money for that. So we've said that let's keep talking. If something changes, we'll come back to you and say we need some more time on this show. And they often will react better to that, I think, because they can see something has changed, so they can see that the figures will therefore need to adapt to that. What is a typical associate fee in the West End? Well, it's a good question. After I just said I'd be candid about it, there isn't one, is the truth. There isn't a typical fee because like on Broadway where they have a minimum, we don't have that in the UK. So unions for UK Equity Protections, Equity for Lighting Designers. Joe's right. So there we go. Yeah, Equity is the one to join for designers. Bec2 is the one. I was a Bec2 member signed up for when I was a technician, and they were really good. So yeah, you should sign up to the various unions. So yeah, ballpark figures for associate assistants fee. It's hard because there isn't a norm, because people. It depends on where the show, what the background of the producer is. For example, I've done quite a few shows that have come out of the National. The fees for a show that come out of the National are generally less than the fees you might get for a show that's being produced by a commercial producer, because they're a subsidized entity, and I get that. So I don't have any problem with that. They need to still be fair, and we have quite a regular conversation, which is we try and split down the amount of days that you're in the theatre and the fee that you're given as an associate, and say, hang on a second, this doesn't quite add up. But it's fair to say, and I'm sure Joe will be backing me up on this, as an associate, and as a programmer is a different situation, but as an associate, you will sometimes be paid more than the designer sitting in the room. And I have been in that experience and Paulie and I always used to have conversations about fees, because I think it should be a conversation. People should talk about it. It's still quite secretive. People tend to not talk about money because they think that it's quite competitive. But I try and pick up the phone as much as possible to other associates or other designers, the lighting designer, whoever's on the show, the programmer, to make sure that everyone's being paid fairly. Yeah, Joe, I really wish you were an associate, exactly, because associates, and Paulie has said to me before, you do realise that you are being paid more than me on this show as an associate, but then that does then balance out, because they might get a royalty for the show. So over the period of time of the entire production, from the first day of pre-production until press night, the designer might then be paid more than you. They might not. If they're on a minimum weekly and it's not that great, and then you might still be paid more as an associate. It's because it's not been structured by producers. It just, a figure generally gets plucked out of the air. That's what I've found anyway. So let me try and dig up some past figures so you've got some actual figures of what I might have been paid to do something, and then it might give you an idea. So I think when I took Curious to the from the National to the West End, I think I got paid £3,500 to do it. I think, which at the time was great. If you split it down by day, no, it's not great. But if you're doing one of those a month, then yeah, that's a great living. But you often aren't. So you're often you might be just doing that for 6 weeks and doing nothing else, and then that doesn't quite work out. But then on the other end of the scale, I think the most I've been paid is definitely in the UK, is in the US, without a doubt. You always get, but then you get taxed a lot more, and you have the healthcare pension and healthcare get taken out, which means the money you take home is not much more than you get in the UK after all the deductions. But part of history as well was still linked through old traditions of being in-house, as well as the light design was programmers and associates, a new form of no fee history. That's true, yeah. We should have been paid by the amount of days we work with an assist. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Joe's right. They're programmers and associates, so they have because there is no fee history, there is no norm to what people should be paid. There is a sort of history for designers that you'll get this much for doing a show at the Donmar, for example, will say this is how much you'll get paid to light a show at the Donmar. They're not going to be very often that the Donmar are going to be having a lighting designer that has an associate. It's only if the designer can't make previews or they can't be there for the whole time, and that's fine. But then they have to find the money to do it. So, and there is no history of that. So they can't say, well, the last time we had an associate, we paid them this much, because there probably wasn't the last time, or there certainly wasn't in the last 3 or 4 shows. But yeah, I think I've been paid up to about in the UK £8,000 or £9,000 to do a musical, but that's on maybe once or twice in my entire career. Breaking it down by days is the best negotiating tactic. Yeah, it's right, because if you suddenly say, okay, well, you're asking me to do a show for £3,500 and you're asking me to be in the theatre for 29 days, that's £120 a day, and that's no money for prep. If you know the programme is on £350 a day or £320 a day, which they might be, and you're paid £120 a day, then there's a discrepancy there that you can start to use as a negotiating tactic with the producer. Thank you, very good. That's okay. Yeah, I do. I know lots of people are secretive about it, and I understand if people don't want to declare what they earn. It's totally personal preference. I get it, but I think it's healthy that we talk about it, because, and I'm sure Joe will agree, that especially as part with the ALD, it's great to if you talk about it, then as a community we'll work together before to get the rates better for everybody. So Broadway minimum assistance £1,200 a week. I think it's about £1,200. Yeah, I think it's about £1,600 for. Well, yeah, I think it's about 12 or £1,600, somewhere around there. And usually you get paid. I've been paid more than minimum on Broadway a lot. But Gina, who's my associate, just did a show and was paid minimum on a show, and she took it because they needed to keep their P&W up. So. But the difference on Broadway is that you get paid the same rate for prepping a show, and so I think Anthony prepped, who was the associate on Frozen, got a prep weeks of something like 26 weeks of prep, because that's how much time it took to prep the show. Which means that if you look at his fee, it's astronomically more than Natasha was paid. But it's just that. Someone in the union has said, but you do know that if associate's prepping the show, then they need to still be paid to prep the show. They can't just do it in someone else's time. And it means that you'll get a better show out of it, because Anthony will be doing nothing other than Frozen for 26 weeks. So the paperwork is going to be infinitely better than us doing a show when we're, and I don't want it to be UK versus US because it's not. Like I'm working across in both, and lots of the US associates come and work over here. It's definitely a big community, but our paperwork sometimes gets looked down on, but that's because we're doing it whilst we're trying to look at the stage of another show in a theatre in the dark. People are coming to talk to you about lamps for a show that you're watching, but you're prepping 3 shows' time. So your paperwork is never going to be as good. And the only way that's ever going to change is if the fee structure changes. Is the programme a fee due to a strong technicians union? No, it's just due to history. There isn't well, BEC 2 is the union, but they don't set minimum rates. I think that the historical programmers' rates mean that it's fairly, and it's now fairly standard how much that a programmer gets paid to do a musical in the West End. Certainly, it's the same. I know that regional theatre in the US and small theatres in the US and regional theatres in the UK and fringe theatres in the UK are going to be different. So we're not trying to glamorise this by talking just about the West End and Broadway, but it's quite an easy comparison. But we check the programmers are quite a tight-knit community, and they all set what they are, where their rates go up every year. They set it, and then they're just quite strong. So it's not really, it is a union in the fact that they're just a union of people working hard to keep the rates that the producers are paying at a level, but it's not a formal union. Since more theatre in the UK and EU subsidised in the US is more commercial profit driven, how does the speed at which your work days for prep tech vary? Do you want to just jump on and elaborate on that? I don't think quite. Maybe I don't quite understand exactly what it is that you're asking. If we don't share information, nothing will change. From Joe, yes, indeed. And the ALD gives records of fee being paid in the theatre. Yes, Joe's right. ALD keeps a good record. So yeah, I think there's also a light line. I think Joe will tell me if that's wrong. I think it's called light line that you can write into, and if you've got a question about your fee, and they'll try and help you as best they can. Caleb, what can I do for you?
Hey, so like a lot of shows in the UK and especially in the EU have more time to like workshop, do out of town kind of tryouts. You know, like in Rob was talking about, not Rob, you're Rob. Tim was talking about yesterday, like coming into 6 and having like 1 day of prep. You know,
yeah.
How much does that vary? Like, you know, do you have more time on a lot more shows in the UK than in the US?
That's a good question. There are a lot of subsidised. There's a lot of subsidised work in the UK and the EU, and so let's take the National Theatre for example. There might be a lot of creative workshop time that show is given. So they might be given 6 weeks in a rehearsal room, 2 years before the show is even thinking about going on the stage, and then they might be given a 12-week workshop 1 year before going on the stage, and then they might be put in for a 10-week rehearsal period rather than you might be doing a 4-week rehearsal period if you're doing a commercial show. So artistically, yes, they're given a lot more time, but from a technical point of view, we don't start working on the show 2 years in advance. The lighting designer might be brought on board and therefore might be involved in that workshop and have some input into it, but it's unlikely as an associate or an assistant that you're going to be brought on board until the point at which you would always be brought on board anyway. I haven't found that I haven't found it been brought on board any earlier just because a show has got more time ahead of time, really, in the subsidised world. We tend to not work as associates or assistants in the subsidised work in the UK, in the EU as much because it is subsidised. So they don't have the money to pay for a designer and an associate and an assistant. I've only ever worked in the subsidised world in the UK when I have been there deputising for another designer. So I've taken a show from a subsidised theatre to a commercial theatre on behalf of another designer, or I have I've been in the National once to do a show because it was a massive show that we thought might do something else, and Paulie wasn't around for a lot of it, so I was in there, and so we did have a bit more time for pre-production there, but is not a novelty that I'm used to. I hope that answers the question. Maybe, yeah.
Thank you.
No problem. Ronan, does the LD only deal with designers, assistant LDs in the UK, or do they work with Irish designers too? Joe can answer that with much more informed knowledge than I can. I think I'm confident, in fact, that they represent Irish designers as well, but Joe will confirm. We'll do 5 more minutes, and then everyone should really eat. So here's Joe. Hi, Joe.
Hello.
Oh, we can't hear you. Well done to everyone for getting this far, because it's been quite an intense week so far, I know, and I'm sure everyone's brains are fried from all the information, but I hope it's useful, and I hope that everyone could take something away from it, even if it's not everything on every lesson, that something is, at least you've got more informed knowledge about some element of it at some point. Hi, Bridget.
Hey, from your perspective, so 2 parts here. Somebody mentioned that due to the pandemic, discussions about paying interns and other lower paid jobs were becoming more prevalent and problems were being solved. I'm curious about what your perspective is on that, because it seems like the pandemic would negatively affect the industry as it is. I mean, obviously none of us are employed, as well as the whole Brexit situation probably making funding for the arts not fabulous, and British politics being kind of not as bad as ours, but still shit. And the whole Brexit thing, and how that affects like working on the continent, or I don't know if there was a lot of artists crossing in that sort of way prior to that, but it was tough. For example, like it's not like you have to get a work visa to work in Germany when you were all part of the EU.
Yeah.
So what's your perspective on those things?
So, good question. So I've worked in various countries in the EU, and at times when I've done those, I've realised that it's I've had easy access. I've been able to move over to work there with absolutely no issues at all, and I think that the truth is that nobody knows now really what we're going to be expected to do when Brexit hits, whether we're going to have to get into work visa to work over there. The expectation is we probably will, but we used to just fly over to do a site visit. So I've flown to Germany to a site visit and flown back in a day. Well, that might not be possible. That's one that we don't know what's going to happen really, but everyone is quite nervous about it. They think that the norm of just taking an associate from the UK and moving that person over to do the show that's going to open in Germany or in Spain or wherever it might be might not be quite as fruitful as it was before. We did that a lot before, and it might not happen as much this time, which is a shame. But there will always ultimately be advantages that come out of that. Then, in answer to your question about the COVID situation, yes, I can understand why it might appear that it will negatively impact paying interns, and there will certainly be theatres that will do that, the negative version of events. They will go down the negative train because they don't have as much money, and they think that they can get away with not paying people where they maybe did before. But we'd like to think, and the information that we're getting so far from the sort of big players, theatre-wise, is that we would hopefully see that, especially I know the National Theatre, for example, have said that they will commit to continuing the same amount of freelancers that they used to employ. They will still commit to employing that many freelancers when the theatre reopens. And that's great, because it could easily have just said, well, we're going to just cut lots of our freelance work because we haven't got the money to do it. So people are saying, even now when they don't need to, it's not like we're going to reopen next week. They are saying that they are committing to continue to pay freelancers and not at any reduced rates. But that is all very well just for a big theatre to say that, but that might not be the case for small theatres. and that it might, as you say, it might negatively impact it, which is sad. But and I'm sure over there you're seeing what we're saying over here, which is lots of theatres are going into redundancies now because they just can't afford to keep their staff on board. And those theatres
Oh, yes.
are not going to be opening the doors to all the freelancers to come back in because they can't even afford to keep their full-time staff. So they're certainly not going to be paying the freelancers to come in. So it's an unknown world, unfortunately, and one that I certainly don't feel hugely informed to speak about exactly what's going to happen. But it's from what we're hearing, it's looking more positive than we maybe expected. But until someone makes a precedent, it's unknown. I think what you need lots of theatres to have a precedent of what they're going to do for other people to follow suit, because it's going to be too easy for people just to say, no, we're not going to have any more freelancers. It needs some big players to sort of really commit to doing it, and then hopefully the others will follow. I think that's what needs to happen. I hope that answers the question. Do you have is that yeah, I think that's it.
Interested in your perspective. There's a lot of complex shit.
Oh, there is,
there,
yeah.
So.
No problem. A task force of professionals is currently collecting information about internships. Well, there we go. Didn't know that. Brilliant. How do you feel about the existence of USIT helps US designers and associates from a process standpoint? Does having an existing body that sets standards and help facilitates education and best practice make it easier for US trained associates? Good question. I'm not a US trained associate, so I feel like I can't well-informed respond. If Tim's still here, he might be able to give another stance on it. But I think that here he is in the chat.
I'm not a US trained associate either, but
there we go.
But I'm sure it helps. And
yeah,
that's a bit of the aim of this course, is just to just spread the skills and the knowledge around, right? Because certainly in the UK, where people don't get taught these skills, I think designers, they struggle to even use assistants because the assistants have no idea what their job is. Right, Rob? And it'll be like, well, it's actually more hassle for me to get an assistant in and tell them exactly what I need than for me to just do it myself or have the production electrician or the programmer do it who I already have a relationship with. I don't know. Does that?
Yes, it's true, actually. Yes, USIT probably does help, but we hope that we're not thinking that we're going to be the new USIT and replace it.
No.
Even if you take away 5% of things of what we've spoken about this week, it hopefully will mean that you will be more informed when you go into the situation when you get asked to be an associate or an assistant, exactly what you need to be able to do. And the more people that do that, and the more that designers see that it's a real beneficial role to have on the production and insist that producers pay for it, the more we're going to keep funneling that work in the right way. Anyway, that I think is now lunchtime, really lunchtime. So I'm going to run, Tim's going to run. Tom's still over in the Vectorworks booth if you want to ask him any questions.
And have a look through the Dropbox. Ryan put lots of good stuff in there last night from Hamilton, from Paramore. Like, actually, look at those Paramore drawings. There's 26 plates of drafting for one show. That Cirque du Soleil show that you saw me calling. There's so many set electrics and stuff in there. Another good example to kind of reinforce everything that Rob and Lamp and Pencil were talking about today. But thank you, Rob, for this morning, and see you all later.
All right, see everyone later.